I wanted to make a change. I wanted to, if you don't expose things, nothing changes. Right, it just
Mm.
stays. And I don't think we should be like that. I do think we need to evolve and to move, and if things are wrong, we need to fix them.
As an investigative journalist, Barbara Dreaver sees the power of truth, stories, and connection. While her award winning career has uncovered corruption and crime across the Pacific, Barbara's true passion is holding space for those who are creating change in their communities and ensuring their voices are heard. Thank you for joining Lynne Foley, host of Remarkable Women, Powerful Stories, as we hear from Barbara about her journey.
My childhood really did shape me to the person that I am today. My dad was a volunteer service abroad, a VSA. He was a teacher, and he went to what was then the Gilbert and Ellice Islands in the Central Pacific on the equator. And he walked into a room, saw my mum, who's a local Kiribati woman, and turned to his friends and said, "I'm going to marry that woman." And he did. And as a result, I am one of the results of their marriage, and a very happy marriage. And my father, we came back to New Zealand for a bit, but then he got a job as a teacher in the Gilbert Islands, so we went back there. And I
Mm.
had the most marvelous childhood growing up there, and with my Kiribati family. But it was British colony at that time, and
Mm.
so there was so many different nationalities. Their parents were living there, and so I got to mix and mingle with the most fantastic kids of all nationalities, and that really did help me who I am today. And also, my mum had 11 brothers and sisters, and they married right across the Pacific. So I have cousins in the Solomon Islands and Fiji and a multitude of other places.
Mm. So, in forming the woman you are today out of that, what seems a
Mm.
reasonably idyllic childhood on a very, very small island in the Pacific, I'm wondering why or what caused you to choose journalism as your pathway and then your career, and how your job postings around the Pacific developed this voice
Mm.
that you have today that's very powerful.
Yes, it's because of my childhood and because I have this love for the Pacific, because literally that's where I'm from. I graduated from university and I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And I had majored in education, but I decided not to follow in my father's footsteps and become a teacher, or my grandfather's footsteps for that
Mm.
matter. Uh, and so I decided that, I talked to a careers counselor at the university, and she said, "Why, have you ever thought about journalism?" Now, my father is a huge one for addressing injustice. I was brought up in that fashion. Anything that seems unjust or is wrong, he really stands up and fights against that. And I learnt that. And so journalism seemed to me a really good fit, because I wanted to make a change. I wanted to, if you don't expose things, nothing changes. It just
Mm.
stays. And I don't think we should be like that. I do think we need to evolve and to move, and if things are wrong, we need to fix them. We can't just sit by idly. And journalism was a great pathway for me because of that. But not only that, I found both in New Zealand and it would be Australia and other countries that there are very few journalists who cover Pacific issues. We have Pacific Island journalists in their respective countries, but in mainstream media in New Zealand, there was very little that was being covered except for disasters or, terrible things that were happening, and then they would get covered in the mainstream media. And I'm a big believer in a story is a story is a story. I wanted to be able to put Pacific voices onto mainstream media. It doesn't mean that I take a Pacific standpoint. what it means is that I provide a platform and make sure that Pacific voices get heard and get a fair crack of the whip. And that's so important when we're talking about aid and having a place at the table.
Mm.
Pacific people have seemed to have got left out somehow. And so it is wonderful that I've been able to do that. And Television New Zealand has enabled me to do that. And of course, our news broadcasts right across the Pacific into Pacific countries.
Mm.
So our people get to see themselves on
Mm.
mainstream media.
So you do have a powerful voice, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that shortly. When do you think you discovered that your voice did have the power or the authority or the ability to make a difference? Was it when you were really young or later on?
Yeah, it was. So I worked in the Cook Islands for a few years and co-owned a newspaper there.
Mm.
And we were uncovering there was a lot of corruption going on at that time. And so we were uncovering some pretty big stories, and we could see the immediate difference that that made. And I was a very young journalist in my 20s, and I remember thinking, gosh, we are having this impact on society. And so that was quite a big moment for me. And so, yes, it was quite early on in my career.
Mm.
And of course, as you get older and wiser, you do know, get to see impacts and why it's important, not just because it's good to chase down the bad guys, which I do enjoy doing, by
Mm.
the way. But it's because, we want a good society for our
Mm.
children, and our grandchildren and our future. And so by doing that, I felt that I was actually making a difference to not just the Pacific community, but also the wider Pacific, the wider region,
Mm.
and here in New Zealand.
Mm. And so you've touched on the Cook Islands, and I know from when we were talking earlier that
Mm.
you have reported on and been involved in some very volatile political times and events, and that put you into some challenging places. Can you please share a couple of these and explore how you found that courage to expose the things you're talking about, what was occurring, and manage the outcomes for you?
So I think Fiji has probably been the pressure point for a lot of my stories. And, as we know, that there's been a few coups in
Mm.
Fiji. And so as a very young reporter working for Radio New Zealand, I covered the George Speight coup, and then I covered the 2006 Bainimarama when he did a military coup in Fiji, and I was there for that. And both times, I think my strength is that I work at grassroots level.
Mm.
So I look at the impact on communities and the people, and I have no problems in holding power to account, which is what I was doing. That, of course, can make you extremely unpopular with leaders, especially military dictators.
Mm.
And that was certainly the case in 2006. And they didn't mind international journalists coming in because it was generally someone would come in, they'd do a couple of stories, and they'd fly out and they'd never go
Mm.
back. But I was going back regularly,
Mm.
and I knew the land, I knew the people, and so I was doing some stories that the regime didn't like. And so it was just a matter of time, I guess. They were keeping the local media under their thumb. They had terrible draconian rules in there. They were censoring, and it was a really tough time for local media. So for me, as you know, I had a lot of my friends there, and I just wanted to make sure that I held them to account for them, with them, in solidarity with my colleagues. And also the public deserved to know. And
Mm.
so it was a matter of time. I did get locked up in Fiji. I got taken to a detention centre on one in 2008 when I landed in Fiji with my crew, and I was locked up for the night. And, it was pretty horrific that that night because I'd been told that the military were probably going to come and get me. I was told this by a very good source and friends, and so I prepared. And I think as a woman, we have extra challenges
Yes.
sometimes, and so I was worried that because I'd heard that some of the females had been assaulted up at the military camp. So for me, to try and set myself up to make sure that I am strong, I started a process in my head, and I know it does sound a bit strange, but I did undress, and then dress again, and undress and dress, and it was to make myself. So I thought if I was made to do that, then I could look at them in the eye and feel strong, even though I wasn't in a position of power. And so yeah, and I put my inhaler in my knickers because I'd also heard that they ran you around the field until you collapse, and I'm an asthmatic. So that's the other
Mm.
thing I did. And what that did for my head mentally was actually prepare me. It was like this rote sort
Mm.
of procedure that I put myself through. And it did really help. And of course, every time I heard a car during the night, I'd run, heard the grating outside open, I'd run to the bars and look out to see if it was a military car come to take me away. It never happened, but I think it made me a stronger person. And I got taken to the plane the next day, and I got on the plane, and I was extremely relieved that I got out, but well aware that I was leaving my colleagues who had to live it. I got to
Mm.
walk away.
Or be forced away, not by choice, of
Yeah,
course. But
no, not by foot, not by choice.
so I can't imagine how that, well, you said it's made you stronger, but I'm sure at the time there was a lot of fallout for you emotionally as you
Mm,
worked through that and all of the issues with leaving your colleagues and for yourself. Um, Hard for those of us not in journalism to imagine that, but we see it playing out now, of course, at the time of recording this around the world with
mm,
journalists in
yeah.
very, very tricky situations.
Mm,
Well, tricky is not the right word, is it? Very difficult and challenging situations in
mm.
war-torn places, putting as much of the truth out as they can, and it's very important for the rest of us.
Yes, it's one of the pillars of democracy, of free media, and it's
Mm.
something that's super important. And if we don't have a free media, and we are being pressured, even in the Pacific, we're being pressured everywhere by leaders who really don't want to talk to media. And to my mind, if you don't want to talk to a media, you've got something to hide. And so, yeah, there's been a number of. I was locked up in Nauru for speaking to refugees, and I was and we have to give people a voice. We
Mm.
do. And it's so crucial as that we live in this topsy-turvy world that we stay true to the pillars of democracy, and free media is definitely that thing.
Mm. So, here in Australia and across the world, we hear about many issues disproportionately affecting the nations and communities across the Pacific, including climate change. Can you please
Mm.
delve into the main ones from your viewpoint and explore possible solutions as you see them occurring or those that are yet to emerge?
Yeah, so many years ago when we started reporting on climate change, it was like we were starting to see the real impact. So, for example, wells in Tuvalu were contaminated with seawater, and in Fiji, I've been to villages have had to be moved, relocated from the coast because they get inundated when the tide comes in. There's one village, Tonguru in Fiji, where you can actually see the gravestones sticking out of the water about 20 meters out, and that's where there used to be a graveyard. And so, we are seeing the very real impact of that. And so we're looking at mitigation now, like what can be done to help protect villages, what can be done to help protect the people. It's about fresh water supplies. It's about staying resilient during cyclones. We are seeing, while we're not seeing more cyclones, they're more intensified. So we see a lot
Mm.
of more Category 5 cyclones that do huge damage to crops and to,
Yep.
and so that is what we're seeing right now. And it's about mitigation. It's about how we can strengthen communities. And that is definitely happening in a lot of the Pacific.
Mm. And of course, it's reported on, in various other nations of the world in various ways. So sometimes it's often hard to get that on the ground true view of what might be happening and what the rest of us might be able to do about it.
Yeah, well, it's even like in countries like in Niue or Tokelau, they have a lot of they use solar power. So instead of getting big vats of diesel coming across to power the power stations, which all contributes to climate change, they're using the natural elements. And New Zealand's played a big part in funding these sorts of adaptations that really do help communities. I'm seeing a lot of, in Kiribati, they plant mangroves in the sea to try and, fortify their
Mm.
shores. It's things like that. They're little things, but they make a world of difference. And it also, you have to remember, it empowers communities. So
Mm.
it's not just about an action.
Mm.
It's what it does up here. And
Yeah.
you talk to most communities, they really don't want to leave their land. That's where their ancestors are buried. So I know Tuvalu has made a deal with Australia, and that's great especially for the young ones who want to be educated overseas. And so countries are coming into partnership because there are things that Tuvalu offers that Australia desperately wants, like, it's a good defence. Its location in the Pacific is critical and of great use to Australia. So it's a bit of give and take. Like nothing is for free, but definitely it's when you have these sorts of partnerships, and if it's done properly, and the local communities get consulted, then you have something that could potentially work.
So if we just take that and then segue into the situation for women and the ongoing push for
Mm.
gender equality and human rights, and including the underrepresentation at the political level, and perhaps a few of your personal experiences as a female journalist as often the minorities. So I'm wondering, would you like to share some of your thoughts in that space, please?
Yeah, and it's such an important issue. And what I've found is that women in the Pacific are sensational. You go to Papua New Guinea, the women there are the hardest workers. They're actually incredible. But yet at the top level, they battle for equality, and you can see that in any parliament across the Pacific. The Cook Islands has a great number of women in parliament. But for the most part, when you look around, it's male dominated, and that's at village level, at chief level, in any position of power. It's the males who dominate, and so yes, and I've found it very difficult myself as a woman journalist working in the Pacific, especially when I was younger. I mean, they're kind of used to me now. They know that they can't mess me around, so they don't. They the leaders are a bit more cautious. But in the
Mm.
old days, I would get a statement like, you this is culturally offensive. And I'm like, no, I've got a job to do and I'm going to make sure that I do it. But yes, it's always been harder as a woman. I think as women get abused on social media a lot more, I've seen the most horrendous things about young women in the Pacific right now, on social media. They get piled on,
Mm.
and it is completely unacceptable. And we see that with the Miss Pacific competitions, the
Mm.
beauty competitions, and it's unacceptable that young women face that kind.
Mm.
Times are tough enough without that as well. And I know how damaging it is. I myself have been the victim of a target of many, many abusive messages, death threats, you name it. You're fat, you're how I look, and I think I've noticed that with others as well. Any woman who pokes her head above others, there will be people who come for you to try and chop it off. And that's just how it is. What I am finding, though, is that there is a big groundswell from other women, actually, to push to change things in the Pacific. And we are seeing groups who make sure that gender equality is addressed. They're incredible groups, like say in Tonga, Tonga's victim support group, and in Fiji, the same thing. These women are doing the most outstanding jobs in elevating young girls, pushing towards even towards like legislation and making sure that that's addressed. That's got to be good. Like to work in these circumstances and to see these incredible wahine, we call them in New Zealand Māori, these women who are just they just completely rock around the Pacific, and there's many driving their own businesses as well. This is so good, but man, I am heartened, but boy, we've got a long, long way to go, and domestic abuse also is a very big issue in the Pacific. Actually, it's a big issue here in New Zealand. It's a big issue in Australia, but it really is in the Pacific. And again, unacceptable. But it's very hard to change this when these guys think that they're in charge and they can do whatever the hell they like, and it's unacceptable.
What do you think it's going to take? Because with First Nations people in our country and other countries of the world, that representation, that having a place at a decision-making table in the first place to get a voice out there. What do you think it's going to take for these amazing groups of women you're speaking about in many of your nations and communities to get that next step into those positions of decision-making?
It's going to take partnerships. Like, no one can do it alone. And so by partnerships, I'm talking about groups working together. And that way is how you make a difference. You're more powerful as a group than as individuals. And so, yes, I think that partnerships is what is going to elevate it. We are seeing groups of women in different countries who are starting to work together, or who work together. But what I would say is that there's no solution in the Pacific that will work unless it's driven by Pacific people themselves. You cannot, the other countries like New Zealand, Australia they've got a lot of, the money's gratefully accepted, the funding is gratefully accepted, but any solution have to come from within the Pacific itself. And there is definitely the expertise to be able to do that. But this is what I mean by partnership. So partnering and true partnership. I'm not talking about we're in charge and this is what we want you to, this is what we said, you should do. But this true partnership is where it will change things. And I am seeing that kind of drive already in some of the non-government organisations. They do some great work there, local staff, programs that are designed by Pacific, and they're doing really well. So that's the only way to go.
It sort of challenges all of us, I think, in Zonta, the Zonta world, for example, that it's a collective activism, or that collectivism you speak of, and the power in the networks, the power in the collective, and more of that is needed. And we need to have men working with us as well, the men who want to see those changes happen, and leaving a space, opening a space so that women can step into it rather than having to push into it all of the time. So a way to go, I think. And I always say in my lifetime now, I thought we'd be further down the track, but we'll keep doing it, I guess, Barbara, till we get to where we've got to get.
That's it. You've just got to keep fighting, because the thing is, we're worth it, and our young girls are worth it, and we can see a better society. Like, I can see it, and it's good for everyone. Mums, we're just worth it. We're worth it.
We're more than worth it. So picking up on the theme of gender-based violence, and particularly in the Pacific nations, you've mentioned, some issues about it being disproportionate, most likely. What are the positive and hopeful changes you see emerging? You did mention the women in Tonga. Where do you see that, and what is it that could be done to amplify those
it all
changes?
comes down, yeah, that's such a good question, because I think, it all comes down to education. And if you grow up in a situation and you think that's normal, then that is going to be normal for you, even though it's abnormal. And I do think that education does make a huge difference. I've been talking to some young women who I met who they're climate change activists. They're so educated, right? And so they may be in the climate change arena, but they are heading off overseas into big jobs, into regional jobs. When you have that sort of caliber, they educate in their own way younger women, and we see that what is the possibilities, what we see what is possible by example. And so I do think that educational programs are super important, especially at a young age level, in the Solomon Islands and Kiribati, and some of the more remote communities. But the one thing that I've learnt, I did a big training program across the Pacific with journalists, is that I didn't take what we do in New Zealand and say this is how it should be done. You have to know the country and know how it works to get the best possible outcome. And you can't just go charging in and say, let's do it this way. An example of that is I said to a woman, I was talking to a woman journalist and saying, oh, you need to, you really, this is many years ago, you should be more proactive, or you need to go in there and, you can go, we do something, what we call a doorstop, like have the camera ready and your microphone and charging. And she said to me, but what if I get stoned? And I thought, good point. Let's rethink this. And so, there are challenges in each country, and this is what I keep coming back to, is that whatever changes are made, it does have to come from the people themselves, from inside the country. It can't just come from us saying this is the way you should do it.
And they have to be listened to, and their opinions listened to and built on, rather than the
exactly.
doing to it's
Yeah.
working with. And
Yeah,
we
exactly.
may not always get that. So that notion there of some of the training you've done a few years ago, in 2024, you awarded the ONZM for non-New Zealand people, the Officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit, for services to investigative journalism and Pacific communities. What does this mean to you particularly, and with your work in supporting and encouraging the young people potentially into journalism or other careers?
It was the proudest moment of my life, and what was it made we lurch from story to story, and in journalism, and it was a time when I was able to reflect and realize that the stories that I had done had made a difference to people's lives, both maybe on an individual perspective, sometimes, changing the circumstances of someone who'd been treated unjustly or was living in a terrible, moldy home, and I did a story and they were able to get a nice home. So you've got it on that level, and then you've got it on the wider level, like helping to expose an adoption agency in Samoa, which a US adoption agency, and they were going in to get children who weren't really orphans. They had parents, and to sell them to parents in the US. And we helped expose that, and they all got arrested, and the people involved, the US people involved, and they're investigated by the FBI. And so when you reflect on that, you think this is good. In terms of, encouraging people into journalism, journalism is evolving so quickly, and that's the technology, right? And there's a lot of resourcing issues with traditional media. And so I try to encourage people to, whatever young journalists, young women, if they want to go into journalism, what doesn't change is the fundamentals of journalism: to tell the truth and be fair, be strong and be brave, which is actually the title of my
Mm.
book, Be Brave.
Yes.
And if you can stick to what's important in journalism and know why you're doing it, there's not a story that I do that I don't think, why am I doing this story? Why is it important? Then if you know that, then it doesn't matter what the platform is. And I just hope that we are not seeing, with the social media, and we're just getting absolute rubbish pushed down our throats, and there's a lot of conspiracy theories and so forth. And people don't know what is true and what is not. And I guess that is my biggest fear as a journalist. And it's why I would encourage, and I do encourage as many people into journalism as possible, because and the right kind of journalism, go and get trained, get into whatever the platform is. Just stick to the principles of good journalism and also care about people. We live in a competitive environment in journalism, but you actually have to care about what you do and hope that you get the best outcome possible.
Yes, it's when you think about the effect it has on young people and the need to teach critical literacy and critical understanding
Mm.
throughout school to be able to sort out what is the truth and what isn't, that in the plethora of information that's coming at them. And as you know, here in Australia,
Mm.
we've made
Mm.
it under 16, you're not meant to have access to a lot of the social media platforms. But it's really challenging, isn't it? And I can't imagine how challenging it is
Mm.
for a journalist. You made mention of your book. I know it's already out on shelves in March. So talk to me a little bit about your book, Be Brave, and what you're putting forward in the book and what you hope it brings to others.
Well, I wasn't feeling very brave when I was writing some of it, because some of the stories that I was writing about were actually quite traumatic, and I'd kind of glossed over them and moved on. And when you're having to rewrite, um, you're having to write about issues that you'd put to one side, it was actually quite difficult. Basically, it's a memoir, but what I hoped, my main aim from this is that I'm telling Pacific stories and sort of the behind the scenes and what
Mm,
really happened, but also I wanted people to understand the joy, the challenges, the ugly, but also the beauty and the wondrous Pacific that I know and love. And we live in this crazy old world right now. It's mad. And
mm,
you turn on the television, or you look online, and you see the most, you get scared, because
mm,
life is it's so unpredictable, with war and conflict and so forth. And so I really thought, if I write this book and show how important the Pacific is to New Zealand, to Australia, to international countries, but also show the humanity, the life, the joy, as I said, then I thought this might be a really great thing. But when you're writing a book, you can't just have it very heavy, because obviously I was writing about like the measles epidemic, which killed more
mm,
than 80 people, and most of them children, in Samoa. You come out of writing people are reading this chapter and thinking, some of the behind the scenes stuff that happened, which was horrific. And it's children's my Achilles heel, right? That is the one thing that I really struggle with. I'd rather be attacked than see children suffer in any way. And so, it was important, though, when I was writing this book, that there's also light and shade, that
mm,
there's funny stuff in there, and there's the most strange stories that people are going to go, wow, what is this? And
mm,
it's just the Pacific. It's just the Pacific. And I wanted to make sure that people had an opportunity to read something that's different, and that they can come away with some level of understanding And that is half the problems that we have in this world, is we don't understand what our neighbors, and that's how you get into conflicts. And so I was really hoping that it might make a difference on that level. And yeah, so I'm hoping that that's what that does. It was also a bit of a therapy for myself. I didn't mean it to be, but it kind of turned out that way. And I'm glad I
And of course,
did
you were
it.
doing it alongside of your day job, which of
Oh,
course is
nearly, yes, it
the
nearly
journalist
caused me
for
to have a,
TVNZ.
yeah, yes, I nearly had I've had my times of thinking I was going to have a nervous breakdown. I've got so much work, working 20-hour days trying to get this book finished. But I have a our press, and Mary Varnum, who's my publisher, she's extremely caring and made sure that I was definitely supported, and she was very kind with extending deadlines. And she messaged me once and said, I can see you're a bit busy at the moment. And I was actually in Vanuatu, and there'd been that horrific earthquake, and where
Yes.
many people, a few people had been killed. And
Mm.
and she said, I can see on the television that you're a bit busy at the moment. So we're just going to extend the deadline a bit. So it was helpful being on television where my publisher could see that I am actually busy.
That's what we all need when we're at university, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
When you haven't done the assignment, and maybe someone will give you an extension without you having to come up with all the reasons. As
That's
we head
right.
to close the podcast in a moment, Barbara, I'm wondering what you think your superpowers are, or your gifts.
I think I've experienced a lot in my life, and one of those things was losing my beloved brother. He took his life. And the grief and how you feel as a family, and it really, the book was the first time I've ever spoken publicly about it. It's things like that. It's my life experiences that have made me stronger, and that is the last thing that you want. It's the last thing. We belong, most people have experienced some type of grief, and I think if we can be stronger from it, and perhaps so when I do a story and I'm working with parents who have lost children, they look into my eyes and they know that I know.
Mm. Yeah.
And I think that's one of my strengths, is that I'm able to relate to people. I care. I'm really ethical. I've
Mm.
never given up a source. But I'm also not opinionated, too opinionated. Sometimes we do analysis, but I'm not opinionated. But I'll use my skills, my life experience, my knowledge to analyze a situation, because when you've been doing it as long as I have, then you see patterns and you're able to assess things that
Mm.
potentially most other people who, the Pacific, most people don't really know the Pacific. And so I'm able to use my knowledge to make assessments. And yeah, so I think those things are probably my superpowers. But can I just say, I do have a secret one, but not so secret perhaps, and that's my family. And I'm genuinely lucky to have my parents who have been phenomenal over the years. They've been supportive. And my sister, my best
Mm.
friend, my sister Rachel, and they have been incredible. And I know that without them, I could not have achieved what I've achieved. And it makes me understand how important family is for our young women
Mm.
coming up through the ranks. And it does make you understand, when you look at your own life or anything that you've been lacking in it, you use that to just make yourself a better, stronger person.
Mm. So do you have a word or two to leave with me today?
I just think we need to care more. I do. I think that a lot of the problems in the world is that we just don't care. Power has become the commodity that we deal in. And I actually think we need to care a lot more about each other, but about ourselves as well, about our communities. And my hope is that we'll see some change because of that. But, we're still waiting at the moment.
We are. Barbara, I met you through Zonta, and today you've given back to us, and Zonta thanks you, and I thank you incredibly for the opportunity to learn more about you and to present your story today, because the power of storytelling is what really matters, and your story indeed is powerful. So thank you.
Thank you.